Beloved people of the internet, this is another episode of The Hardline According to Stonefruit with my ace, Mark French.
Good day, everybody.
Morning. So this is also available at stonefruit.substack.com, where it is called After Russia, America's Suicidal Strategic Posture with China. It's also a critique of John Mearsheimer's theory of great power politics. And I feel like picking on John Mearsheimer a little bit since he's been sitting at the Olympian heights of realism in Anglo-American political science for decades at the University of Chicago. And his theory of great power politics is as good a place as any to start demolishing so that we can clear out space for a new way of thinking about international relations. And I took a close look at his 2019 article, Bound to Fail, The Rise and Fall of the Liberal International Order. And it felt to me like the summation of a long and illustrious career. And in it, he argued that there will be three realist orders in the near future. A quote unquote thin one, there's a mutual concern like arms control, even though America's gotten out of so many of the vital treaties and the doomsday clock has been moved closer to midnight because of it. And it would also handle global economic cooperation, even though the WTO is flatline, and it would handle things like climate change, even though they are doing such a bang-up job already implementing the Paris Accord. But in addition to that thin order, there will be two what he called thick bounded orders, one led by China, one led by United States. So far, I'm on his page, I agree, and that these two blocks will be dedicated to marshaling their members for interblock economic and security competition.
Sure.
But I think Mearsheimer and the American elites see this contest as a zero-sum game with little opportunity for collaboration in ways that can improve the entire planet. Chinese necessarily see it as a zero-sum game. And Mearsheimer urges America to, quote, not allow China to dominate pre-existing economic institutions and use the resulting influence to gain power at the United States expense. To which I say, good luck with that. China's already made the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the China Development Bank, the New Development Bank, which is the BRICS Bank, and it proposed an alternative to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which all of America's stalwart Asian allies jumped right on board with. And then since Trump pulled out of the TPP, the Chinese have applied to join that rump organization, the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Sure.
And I encourage everyone to go to my article at stonefruit.substack.com because there's this killer infographic that shows how now more than 2/3 of the world has more trade with China than they do with the United States.
Yeah.
In the last, especially since their ascension to the WTO in 2001, it's just skyrocketed. And Mark, I think we should do our civic duty and tell those fellas and ladies in DC something that they do not know. That Asia has a plan B, and the plan B involves working with China closely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just in your opening statement and paragraph, there were so many relevant points made basically immediately. So even though Trump won partly about rhetorically going against the TPP because Americans that are now 40 or 50 or 60 have been burned so bad by these trade agreements that they had a bad taste in their mouth. So Trump so often adds enough truth to capitalize on real animus within the American populace. So even though rhetorically he goes against the TPP, he immediately tried putting those individual agreements in place on the back end throughout his administration, quietly signing individual country agreements that were within the full agreement of the TPP. He immediately started to institute the TPP, even though rhetorically he was against the TPP. And then the other point that you made about 2/3, so the United States creating the language of the TPP, it was already out there publicly. So why wouldn't China just take all that language, modify it, reverse it, and make it within their own sphere? So the other really valid point of your opening statement is if you just go 3,300-mile radius out from Burma, that's over half of the world's population, and China is the manufacturing hub. Why wouldn't Asia just continue to do business with itself in the face of the Western financialized decline?
Yeah, I think that's why China is so hot to be allies with Myanmar and Pakistan, because it can get access to those warm water ports.
Yeah,
And Trump articulated a very cohesive and uh, compelling critique of the liberal international order as a
sure.
candidate in
Yeah,
2016. And if you look at his closing advertisements on YouTube, they lay out about 7, 8, 9 very clear, distinct, and reasonable critiques of the international order.
sure.
Of course, he got in power. He didn't have the attention span to govern, had no interest in learning, and was a disaster. but
Yeah, tomato, tomato.
you know, he did try to pull America out of Syria,
Hmm.
and this gets creepy because the military just said no.
Right.
They were lying to him.
Yeah,
He ordered them out, and they did not depart.
yeah,
When the US military departs from civilian leadership to pursue their own goals, I become a very scared holder of an American passport.
sure.
But back to Mearsheimer and what he said about the liberal international order,
Hmm.
I think his stature comes from just saying what the elites are already thinking, or giving voice to what their inchoate things like, quote, US policymakers should ensure that they create a formidable bounded order that can contain Chinese expansion. But this is the bet that the neoliberals made in the 1990s, that if we
That's
allow
right.
China into the WTO, they're magically going to turn into a liberal democracy and become a quote unquote stakeholder in this American led system.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
these these trends that make China uncontainable have not gone away, and they are being stoked by the relentless, insatiable, and rapacious greed of the people at the top of American corporations.
hmm,
And I think that greed is best exemplified by one of my favorite conceptual categories and human with names and addresses, the Davos man, which was first articulated in an article by Samuel Huntington in 2004, and recently in Peter Goodman in his book, Davos Man Devoured the World. And In the Huntington article, he called it a global superclass. So I would say that it is a transnational global superclass that utilizes the power of the nation state and
Yeah.
multilateral institutions, but to fulfill their own personal, class, and institutional goals
Mhm.
with no allegiance to country or ideology. And in a recent podcast on New Economic Thinking, Goodman quote, for Davos Mann, China was central to the profit-making equation. China was ultimately allowed into the WTO in 2001 and got access to markets around the world. China was the ultimate way for companies that were organized around enriching shareholders, often by reducing costs, to make their stuff much more cheaply than they ever could at home, and then ultimately to sell it in a country of 1.4 billion consumers, making it the world's largest potential consumer market for damn near everything.
That's right.
And that, as a mercantile goal for America, goes back to the whaling era in the 19th century, when the cry was oil for the lamps of China.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, it becomes solidified by the crookedness of manifest destiny. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of Filipinos being murdered, Hawaii being absorbed in a really weird way. But yeah, you hit the nail on the head. That's right.
And I think to hide their activities, the American elite and the Chinese elite too, I've noticed that a lot of the foreign direct investment in China comes from the British Virgin Islands, Cayman Islands, and Samoa.
Absolutely.
Noted corporate capital, Samoa.
Hmm.
And
Yeah. Right.
these are places that you can obscure the beneficial owner of the companies, and they pump a lot of money into China. And
Yeah.
I have no idea the split, but I'm sure it is Chinese elite and American elite that just don't want to admit that they are doing this and how badly it's affecting the United States. And you know
Hmm.
what the American elites do not also seem to realize is that empires come and go, and there's no way to deny that China has a massive population. It's successfully lifted them out of poverty in only 2 generations.
Record time. I mean, this really kicked off in the late 70s and early 80s. I mean,
Yeah.
that's how little of time they have completely transformed their entire economy, culture, infrastructure. I mean, not since Russia industrializing in the late 1800s has this happened in human history.
Yeah, I want to focus on a Rise of China episode in the future, and
Sure.
this will be more on Taiwan. But
Hmm.
it, what they have managed to achieve in the even the 15 years from the death of Mao in 1976,
Sure.
Deng Xiaoping's reforms beginning in 78, and their ascension
Hmm.
in 2000 to the WTO in 2001.
That's
That's
right.
impressive. But then from 2001 on, it's game on.
It
And
will not be replicated.
yeah, and
It
in
can't be replicated, or everyone will die. If every major other economy that has the capacity to do what they just did, if they do it, eh, there's not enough planet Earth to make that happen.
I saw a study about 7 or 8 years ago that said if we are to give everybody on the planet the standard of living that the so-called West enjoys, which always includes Australia, Korea, and Japan. So
Right? Yeah.
the rich countries, that we
Yeah.
would need, I believe it was 7 more planet Earths. So it's
To
not
do it the way that we're doing it.
going to
Yeah,
happen.
it's not going to happen.
Not going to happen. But before I depart on the China that contributed to its rise, uh, I can't leave out that they are experts in transferring technology and knowledge to themselves. And the Chinese have a four-syllable saying for damn near everything. And my ex-wife certainly told me a large amount of them. But one I think was knowledge wants to be free, and they all of their joint ventures require a local partner, and giving that local partner uh, access to all of the intellectual property of the collaboration. So that technology transfer and that going fast and loose with intellectual property has to be mentioned as a significant component of their rise. But the rise has occurred, and I have heard it phrased like this: that
Mhm.
Mao made China free, Deng made China rich, and Xi is making China strong.
Sure.
And we've mentioned the China-Russia-led anchor currency that's being laid out by Russian economist Glaziev in
Yeah.
previous episodes. And I think with that and their signal attribute of patience, because they know that they it took them a few centuries to lose their role as the center of the world. And so
Right.
they don't mind taking a little bit of time to gain it back. So after
Yes.
that currency, then I think even staunch American allies in Asia and even Europe, if they can rediscover their self-interest
Mhm.
and need for Russian energy, that they'll all start utilizing this Chinese Russia-led anchor currency.
There's no doubt about that. I completely agree with you. And the West, regardless of what happens with the new Eastern Bloc, I think everyone in our sphere and our peers could use a little bit of a longer term perspective on things. I don't think there's anything wrong with the West absorbing and becoming familiar with and maybe learning a little bit from the East viewing and vision of time. Things don't have to be so short term. So I think that's a really relevant point that you made is when entire economies and communities are willing to play things out long term, that it could really affect policy positively or negatively. But just having that as an option, I think is going to become very, very important over the next 20 or 30 years. It's not a tool that the United States currently has.
I don't think we'll ever integrate that into the American character or political and economic structure at
I'm
all.
pessimistic about it as well. I agree with you. I don't think we will either until it's too late.
I think the 1919, I believe, was the year Dodge versus Ford case is
Hmm.
is the go-to one for me to look at. Corporations have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders
Right.
to go after quarterly profits.
Yeah.
And the American military train of thought is so focused on kinetic war and cyber war lately, but
Sure.
it's about imposing one's will in a compact time frame. And
Hmm.
that's what we're going to see as this episode goes on about how that's going to get us into a fuckload of trouble in Taiwan. But I mean, let's look at the Afghanistan papers. They proved that the Afghan war was long, expensive, disastrous, and was built on lies and futility emanating from the top immediately.
Yeah.
They were all admitting they didn't know what they were doing or how to get out, and that they were lying to the American people. So that comes out in the Washington Post in 2019 and doesn't cause a ripple in the American consciousness.
No.
And then Biden pulls out. It's one of the only good things he's done so far in his administration. But China waltzed right in after the withdrawal and started writing checks and achieved everything that they had hoped for.
Buying rights to rare earth minerals that are going to shut us out of that space for years to come.
That was the only hole in the donut left in terms of controlling Eurasia through the Belt and Road Initiative.
That's right.
So they just wait, and then it falls right into their hands.
Yeah.
And as Vuk Jeremic, the former foreign minister of Serbia, where I was an exchange student before the war.
Oh, lucky you.
It was
That's
very
beautiful,
interesting.
Man.
It was very interesting. I learned some of the language and had a native host family, and I think that gave me some insight into the Slavic soul, dare I say. And what Vuk said was that, quote, America has been fighting without winning for years, and America and China has been winning without fighting.
Without fighting. That's right.
I think that's very true. And America's only response is more war.
Well, so, it's and you just said it so succinctly. Just because people in the United States don't talk about their own government and policy from other people's eyes, that doesn't mean the rest of the planet Earth thinks about things here that way. Everyone is well aware of the 80s Cold War. Everyone else is well aware that Afghanistan, 55% of its labor force was women. It was a swinging culture, if you will, before we ruined it and turned it into a theocracy. Everyone else already talks about openly and is well aware that part of the sanctions regime of the United States is to spend hostile countries broke through military spending. The rest of the world is already well aware that the United States spends 11 times more than the second place country on military spending. The rest of the planet Earth is already well aware that the $40 billion we just sent to Ukraine to equal $54 billion already in one fiscal year is more than the entire Russian expenditure on defense. So just because people in the United States do not talk about math and history and geopolitics, everyone else does. They are aware of these machinations. And they have been for a very long period of time.
Yeah, you bring up a perfect point. And in doing the research for this episode, I listened to a fair bit of retired General Robert Spalding.
Yes, Spalding, sure.
And he was a senior China advisor to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was the senior director of strategy at the National Security Council and the chief architect of the Trump administration's national security strategy.
Sure.
And he speaks Mandarin. And I found him on the Realignment, which is Sagar and Jetty and his partner
Marshall
podcast. And they're right-wingers. And they're right-wingers.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Marshall Falk.
I listened to.
Yeah.
Right. What's his name again? Give him props.
Marshall Falk.
Yeah, they're great. And they're both from the Hudson Institute, I believe, or at least Marshall is.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And so, you know, I'm not afraid to hear what the right has to say. And this guy's credentials are pretty impeccable. And I don't agree with his assessment announcement that the Chinese don't care about Taiwan, the island, to take it over. Obviously, what they want is its business acumen, its financial success, and its industrious population. They don't want to destroy it. But Spalding, with that one big thing where I think he's wrong, he said a lot of smart stuff that I was very interested in. And one is that America is spending $30 in forward force projection in the Pacific for every dollar that China spends on. So your
Right.
previous role, you spoke about how America can spend other countries broke, and everyone says that's universally what they did to bankrupt the Soviet Union, and
That's right.
that Reagan era military spending bankrupt the Soviet Union, causing it to fall. Well, ironically, America is now doing the same to itself vis-a-vis China to fight China by spending $30 for every one.
I just you just hit the nail on the head. That's what has to be answered. And without the participation of the American public discussing these things openly, you just said it the right way. This is not the 1800s. This is not piracy in the high seas. At some point, the United States is going to have to decide how much money they're willing to spend being the supreme naval power on the planet Earth to keep trading lanes open on the oceans. And like you said at the beginning of this piece, if 2/3 of the most important countries on the planet Earth already have trade agreements in place with each other, as China, as the hub of their trading sphere and ports, what the hell does the United States need to keep spending itself broke defending open waters on the other side of the world that no one wants them in the first place?
Yeah, America keeps sending so many warships, even carriers, through the Taiwan Straits. The United States is not even a signatory to the international law of the open seas.
That's right.
We could do an episode on all the shit that America did not sign on to.
Sure.
But I'm trying to find really accurate figures and the exact tempo of military spending as a percentage of federal discretionary spending, because let's look at the federal budget. The biggest pieces are interest on the debt,
Right.
non-discretionary spending for Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid.
What people call entitlements, which is preposterous because everybody paid for it already. Yeah, right.
Yeah. And those systems have unfunded liabilities of about $70 trillion.
Right.
So even though the federal debt is usually called by about $33 trillion, that figure never incorporates the unfunded liabilities in Social Security and Medicaid.
That's right.
So the American debt is actually far closer to $100 billion, but no one ever mentions that.
Yeah, 100 trillion.
Yeah, but trillion here, trillion there. Before you know it, it's real money.
Who cares?
But back to the American budget. So those are the categories: service on the debt, non-discretionary spending, and federal discretionary spending.
Sure.
Military spending as a percentage of federal discretionary spending is huge.
It's like 54%, right?
What is it?
It's like 54%, I think, right? It's a majority.
I believe so.
Yeah.
And it has been rising as a percentage of non-discretionary spending for years.
Yeah.
And My aspiration is to find that end point. If we go by the trends as they are now, it will crowd out all other uh, federal discretionary spending so that we will only
There's
spend on war. And
yeah.
I think the Congressional Budget Office, which is nonpartisan, respected, and tracks this stuff, I think they placed it at around 2030.
Sure.
So that's going to be a real moment of reckoning for the United States.
Yeah, I think it's such a cool thing you just said. It's if they are going to continue with this clown show, unauditable, unaccounted money washing through the Pentagon, they should have to completely separate it and wash it from the fake proposed American debt. They should literally have to write it down and make it disappear immediately and put it in its own category. If they want to continue to put these foreign engagements on credit cards, the idea that that should be publicly accounted for or used as for austerity and to freak people out. Number one, the government is not a personal household. America makes its own dollars. The United States makes its own money. The idea that it can't pay money to itself for money that it owes itself is just preposterous. It's if people don't start holding these people accountable that act like austerity is coming and the debt actually matters because it doesn't, it's the idea of it is ridiculous. They should completely have to remove and wash the money that they spent on themselves without anyone's permission. All the stimulus that's been given to the banks and put directly on the books of the S&P and is given to the Pentagon, no one votes for that. No one says okay. It's trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. I think that's a very important point that you just brought up.
I think when the international community starts to realize that the budget figure is or the debt figure is actually $100 trillion and not even 33 or 34
Sure.
trillion, and this comes up Russia China anchor currency, that I think the international investment community is going to start demanding a lot more than less than 1% return on its T-bills. I anticipated getting above 10% even at one point, and in the near future. And that is going to destroy the American economy and create inflation that will make the 70s look like a picnic.
Yeah.
That's going to be the moment the American empire drops. So I keep a close eye on T-bill returns and my magic formulation, Mark. I'm trying to 20, 20, 20. $20 a gallon gasoline, 20% inflation, and 20% returns on US Treasury bills. And when that happens, brush off your passport.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
let's look at how China is spending its money on the military, which is undergoing a rapid modernization now, and why their
Sure.
cost is their modernization efforts are so cost effective.
Yeah.
They have found the Achilles heel of America's high tech projection.
Hmm.
So they blew one of their own satellites out of the sky at the highest level of orbit. I believe it was 500 miles above the Earth. And the
Sure.
U.S. military is, well, why'd you do that? We want some explanations. Why the fuck do you think they did it? The entire
To
American
show you
military,
we can do it. Yeah.
the entire American military is wholly dependent for targeting, command and control, and communications
Yeah.
on satellites.
Yeah.
And the other key piece of American forward force projection are carrier groups.
Hmm.
US and China and Russia have hypersonic missiles. The US doesn't now. China
No.
missiles, boom, carrier groups gone.
Sure.
As part of America deindustrializing, China now has 40% of international ship manufacturing. So
Yeah.
they can put a lot of craft into the water.
Yeah.
And they're focusing on anti-access area denial weapons, A2AD.
Hmm.
And that's going to put a huge bubble of inaccessibility over any supposed Chinese invasion of Taiwan.
Absolutely.
And so just focusing on these and cyber warfare is something they're focusing on.
Well,
Just
you brought up other completely relevant points on this matter previously in previous shows. This this is what laziness and corruption and monopolies and lack of dynamism looks like. I mean, look at the preposterous level of failure of our current fighter jet. What is it, the F-35?
yeah,
The flying brick that loves to like freak out and crash whenever it feels like. I mean, when you just continually for 50 or 60 or 70 years award these no bid corrupt contracts over and over again, Boeing, Carlisle, Halliburton, I mean, just over and over and over. This is what that looks like. Everybody's on the take, everybody's getting rich, everybody's getting paid. There's no accountability. No one has any reason to shut these money lines off. And this is what no scrutiny, no outside perspective, no competition looks like. I mean, you and I both grew up during a time in this country's history where a guy could really tinker around in his garage and come up with something actually brilliant and beneficial, and he could make a good living and he could be awarded a proper patent and it could turn into something. When you stop doing that, this is what this ends up looking like.
yeah. And they just can't get out of the mind frame in favor of endless kinetic war.
Yeah,
And
which is not going to be a thing anymore.
right. And okay, you can look at weapon platforms like the Osprey or the Striker
Sure.
that they never worked for decades, but they just would linger on. But those are just kind of icons of poor military spending by the United States. But
Yeah.
those are just icons of how bad and stupid it can be. The overall thrust of just doing it, period, on such a overkill level is
Right.
even more dangerous. And you brought up the F-35. The thing falls to pieces when it hits Mach 1. And the key feature of American force projection in East Asia, the 7th Fleet, can't stop crashing into stuff. So, even though America has this endless militarism as a core feature of its being,
Mhm.
it's not even good at it.
No, right.
And but China's making all of these costs of they're 11th in terms of all the nation's military spending as a percentage of GDP,
Mhm.
only
Yeah.
1.7%. And look to start getting more into Taiwan. Larry Wilkerson, one of our favorites on military issues, former Powell Chief of Staff, he said that of all of the war games that he's participated in regarding China, Taiwan, and the United States, that they all end up going nuclear because there's no way
There's
that.
no other alternative. We can't.
Yeah,
There's nothing we can do to hedge against what's happening in China and Russia without doing that. I really respect and appreciate Larry Wilkerson at the end of his career. There's no way this is going to benefit him in any way. he's just being a patriotic American and telling the truth. Like I really appreciate the work that Larry Wilkerson has taken on at the end of his career.
For which he was rewarded by a visit from the FBI a couple years ago.
Yeah, of course.
And he said, God damn it, they were wearing jeans. This isn't the first time I've been visited by the FBI, but back then they
Treat me
looked
with
like they were from
respect.
the FBI.
Where is your tie?
These guys were just wearing jeans.
That's good. I appreciate that.
But, relative to the war in Ukraine, the mainstream media and press conferences are starting to say that, well, why don't we use nukes? Why don't we show we're not?
Yeah, right.
Why don't we show we're not afraid of using nukes to Russia? And
yeah,
do we need to fucking remind the world that nuclear war would be a bad idea?
Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump just advocated for using a nuke to reroute a hurricane.
Couldn't we just give it a little blast? Just a small one, just the tip.
Just the tip. Yeah.
But even a limited first strike is going to create nuclear winter. And it's going to kill billions of people.
Yeah.
I don't know why we need to remind people, but nuclear
it's
war.
Silly. It's really silly. And this, this is one thing that's so great about your work, and something that I appreciate. Listening to the mainstream media, which is clearly just the propaganda arm of the state at this point. I don't care what flavor of Baskin Robbins ice cream you pick. Supposedly, there's 51 flavors of media in this country, which if you actually trace the companies that own these conglomerates, that's not the case. But I appreciate the work that you're doing, because at some point, there has to be a realistic, in-depth conversation if everyone is going to feign care over these matters. And it's just not going to come from there. It's preposterous.
I don't think it's ever going to occur. I think that's why it's incumbent upon you and I to join the growing new media ecosystem where sane people can get their news and information and background knowledge, because the mainstream media is not going to provide it.
The only reason I ever watch, the only reason I ever consume it and watch it is just to get a realistic idea of how disconnected they are from reality, and have some kind of framing of what they're trying to put out into the universal lexicon.
Yeah, how they are enacting their disinformation governance regime.
Friends close, enemies closer, right?
Yeah. So jumping back to Mearsheimer, his 5 assumptions of his theory of great power politics are these, and these are quotes. States are the key actors in the system, which is anarchic. Number 2, all states have some offensive military capability, and some have a lot. 3, it is impossible to know the intentions of other states with any degree of certainty. 4, survival is the principal goal of states. 5, states are rational actors. They act strategically in pursuit of their goals. Okay, I'm picking on Mearsheimer because I think he represents the mainstream of American political science, and it mirrors and creates American elite thinking among the political class. So let's dispense with the first, fourth, and fifth assumptions right away, just by looking at America's contemporary strategic posture regarding Russia and China. Just
Right.
what Biden said in the last couple months. He called Putin a murderous dictator, a war criminal, and said, quote, "For God's sakes, this man cannot remain in power." That's just March. And just like a week ago, he said, when asked if the United States would, quote, "get militarily involved in Taiwan." Yes, just right like that.
Immediately. Yeah.
And he followed that up immediately with, "It was a commitment that we made." No, it wasn't. It wasn't. It
No,
wasn't made.
it wasn't.
Here's what was made, President Biden, in case you need a little refresher: the Taiwan Relations Act of 1980.
Hmm.
So I want to take a little peek at that and then go through the highlights and lowlights of the Biden administration's interactions with China so far.
Good Lord.
Yeah, so the Taiwan Relations Act of 1980, it's a framework for, and I'll be quoting it at some length. This is a quote: "Peace, security, and stability in the Western Pacific." And it's to promote, quote, "the foreign policy of the United States by authorizing the continuation of commercial, cultural, and other relations between the people of the United States and the people on Taiwan."
Hmm.
And so this has laid out the general parameters of what has always been called strategic ambiguity in America's one child policy. And here's further quotes from the Taiwan Relations Act. It's, "Peace and stability in the area are in the political, security, and economic interests of the United States and are matters of international concern. Quote, Taiwan will be determined by peaceful means. Quote, America will provide Taiwan with weapons of a defensive character and, quote, maintain the capacity of the United States to resist any resort to force or other forms of coercion that would jeopardize the security or social or economic system of the people on Taiwan." So that strategic ambiguity says to maintain the capacity to resist any resort to force, not to definitively commit to using that capacity. Now, I'll do a quick little freestyle on Taiwan and China in case any of our viewers don't know the general background of that.
Yeah, please do, because Taiwan thinks they are the legitimate government of the entirety of China. So I can't wait to hear this.
Yeah, here's my take on it, Mark. And
Yeah.
I've laid out my bona fides on China. I
Hmm.
was an exchange student there, a language studier right after Deng got to power. I've
Okay.
studied it for years. I've known I have a passing knowledge of Mandarin. I was married to a PRC woman,
Hmm.
and I have worked twice in Taiwan and
Hmm.
at a university. And I borrowed my colleague there's moped and did a lap around the island, 2/3 of the island. So I know a fair bit about China and Taiwan.
Good.
And here's my take: is that the Qing dynasty, which was a Manchu dynasty, starts crumbling around the beginning of the 20th century.
Hmm.
When they finally go kaput, there is a period of several warlords, 7, 8, or 9 warlords that dominated China from the teens through World War II until 1949. And at the end of World War II, when the warlords were basically down to the Communist Party and the nationalists led by Chiang Kai shek,
Hmm.
Mao won. And Chiang Kai shek and his rump army and the nationalists all fled to Taiwan.
Sure.
And the People's Republic of China was declared on the mainland in 1949.
That's right.
Now, because Chiang Kai-shek was Uncle Sam's man, we recognized Taiwan as the legitimate government of all of China.
Okay.
Taiwan even held the Chinese seat on the UN Security Council.
That's right.
But and Nixon's opening of China, we recognize China as the one ruler of all of China, mainland China, and Taiwan.
Well, that's where all the people and resources were. What else
Yeah,
would you do?
it's kudos to Kissinger and Nixon for
Sure,
doing it, but
I
it's
understand.
why it became a charade that was hard to keep, that could not be kept up forever. So it was not. And when America recognized China, it also put out the Taiwan Relations Act to just set a clear framework of how they're going to deal with Taiwan moving forward.
Sure.
And that strategic ambiguity has been at the core of America has treated Taiwan. But let's look at how Biden has been interacting with China, because
Yeah,
it got
please
off
do.
to a shitty
Sure.
start. It hasn't gotten any better.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so first thing, they have a summit in March 2021 in Alaska. Obama, who's responsible for the selection of this barely sentient cadaver, even he warned American allies that, quote, don't underestimate Joe's ability to fuck things up. And,
Yeah.
and boy, did he. Starting with this March 2021 Alaska summit with China,
And how?
Anthony Blinken and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, Chinese counterparts State Councilor Wang Yi, and Chinese Communist Party Foreign Affairs Chief Yang Jieshi. They were supposed to start off with 2 minutes for each side to just have some banal pleasantries. And immediately, Blinken goes off onto the rules-based order, which is, as a Soviet foreign minister says, Lavrov says, it's never been specified. So it just means whatever the US and its allies feel like doing at the moment. And then Blinken goes on to say, quote, deep concerns with the actions by China, including on Xinjiang, Hong Kong, cyber attacks in the United States, and economic coercion towards our allies. So 4 minutes of pleasantries turns into an hour-long spat that's all caught on camera. It bears mentioning that the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, who was at that meeting, is the same Jake Sullivan being indicted now, well, not legally indicted, but being portrayed in the Sussman trial that's going on now as one of the key architects of the Russiagate hoax that Hillary Clinton authorized.
Yeah.
This is all coming out in the legal proceedings now. And the latest piece is that the alleged relation between a Trump organization server and the Russian Alpha Bank that they fed to Slate and New York Times was okayed by Sullivan and by Hillary herself, and that piece, that Alpha Bank piece, was signed off on by Jake Sullivan, who's now sitting across from his Chinese counterpart of last year.
It's so sticky and gross. I mean, you have the Biden family directly being eyeballs deep in Chinese money for a very long period of time. That's not going to go well, even if he's alive for the next election, which I doubt.
I don't either.
And then you have Hillary people being eyeballs deep in all of the creepy Russiagate stuff. I mean, it's really, I mean, Rachel Maddow, a Rhodes Scholar, is eyeballs deep in pushing this kind of bullshit for a decade at least. And it's just, everybody knows it but them. I mean, it's gotten ridiculous and preposterous and silly and clown show and gross.
Yeah, the DNC utilized CrowdStrike, a private firm, to look at the DNC's server. And this was when Russiagate was in full steam during the Trump administration that that the Russians had hacked into the DNC server. You know, the NSA's own chief technical officer, Bill Binney, said, no, they didn't. That'd be impossible.
Yeah.
It was taken out on a
I really appreciate Bill Binney telling the truth at the end of his life and career.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite whistleblowers. So we knew it from a lot of perspectives that Russiagate was bullshit. But now in the Sussman trial, we're seeing that it's not only bullshit, but Hillary herself authorized it.
Yeah.
So, you know, back to that Alaska summit meeting. So they went back and forth for a freaking hour. And at one point, Blinken says, I've talked to over 100 of my counterparts. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. You've already talked to over 100 of your counterparts, and you're just now talking to the fucking foreign minister of the People's Republic of China?
Yeah. Your counterparts. Blinken is who is he right now? He's not the Secretary of State,
Yes,
he is the Secretary of State. So Blinken is our current Hillary Clinton, right?
Yeah.
Or
John Kerry.
So or right. You can go on and on. So Blinken is proposing to talk to the most important 30% of the entire planet Earth before he talks to the second largest economy on the planet Earth.
Was it that far down his to-do list?
I mean, it's really just so stupid. I don't get it.
When I first heard that, it went in one ear and out the other. And then later, you know, a few hours after listening to it, I'm thinking, wait a minute, over 100? Because then I started thinking, okay, you know, you give a courtesy call to your neighbors, Mexico and Canada. You call Boris Johnson because we've got that special relationship with the UK.
Brazil, Venezuela.
I wouldn't even go that far. You know, here's my list.
Up in Canada. Yeah, right.
Yeah, here's my list. Our neighbors, the UK, France is our oldest ally. Call Macron.
Right.
Okay, France and Germany have been stalwart allies since World War II. Call them. And that's where my list would stop. And then
93 more. And then 93 more countries.
I think after Japan and Germany, then you'd start to think about calling the foreign minister in the most important bilateral relationship on planet Earth. But that's just me, Mark.
Yeah.
So then, too, I thought of this phrase in Blinken's diatribe, economic coercion. And I'm thinking, well, what is that? That's really vague. So I went, but then I realized I had also read that exact phrase in Mearsheimer's 2019 Bound to Fail.
Well, there it is.
So I go back to that and I follow, there's a footnote by that phrase. So I followed the footnote, and it's an article by Jennifer Lind in Foreign Policy. And I'm, oh my God, foreign policy, the soapbox for the mainstream of the DC foreign policy blob.
Right.
So I immediately Google her thinking, oh God, she's going to be employed by the State Department. And she was employed by the State Department. So of course she's got an a PhD from MIT in security studies. Of
Yeah.
course she worked at the State Department. So and I read her article, and so I'm assuming that she got this phrase economic coercion into common circulation at
Hmm.
the State Department when she worked there.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, well, how is Jennifer Lind using this phrase economic coercion
Sure.
in her article? So I read it, and there's a long quote in the piece at stonefruit.substack.com, but I'll just bullet a few of them. Okay, this South Korean conglomerate Lotte had it sold land to the United States for them to build the THAAD missile defense program.
Hmm.
China said there were fire safety violations and closed down 80% of Lotte's supermarkets in China. Japan ran into one of China's ships, so China stopped sending them rare earth metals. Uh, Chinese dissident Liu Xiaobo got a Nobel Prize in 2010. So China embargoed fish exports. Not for long, I'm imagining. It's probably very difficult to feed
Right.
1 million people.
Yeah.
And then Mongolia hosted the Dalai Lama, which, Mongolian Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism come from the same origin. Uh, so it's quite meet that he should go to Mongolia, but Beijing imposed extra fees on their commodities and froze a $4 billion loan. So I'm looking at this list of stuff that Jennifer Lind wrote as cardinal examples of China's heinous economic coercion in Asia, and I'm thinking, what the fuck? Isn't that just garden variety, great power politics?
Right.
I mean, I am a huge, I have a great distaste for whataboutism, but I will engage in it now. I mean, isn't that exactly the kind of shit America's been doing in foreign affairs ever since it started to have the power to do so in the late 19th century?
Well, I mean, that's the cosmic joke right now, right? And that's a very good point. John McCain, may he rest in peace, used to make fun of Russia being a gas pump, masquerading as a government or as a nation state. How is it not the case? Who is taking on American banking and World Bank, which is us, and IMF, which is us? Who is taking fake American dollars right now for us to not build any infrastructure, but to steal all of your oil, steal your roads, steal your healthcare system, steal your schools, steal your water? I mean, how has the United States not become the bully on the playground and just become a banking cartel supported by a mafia style muscle? I mean, it really is just a banking cartel backed by the world's most egregious military presence. That's really all it is. Take our fake money and give us what we want, or we'll drone strike you. And that's really all it is. And I don't think that normal citizens in the United States that are brilliant and hardworking people would allow this to continue much longer in this current form. I just don't see it.
I don't see a critical mass of the American citizenry get informed, or if they aren't having any avenue to impact political decision making. So I think we're fucked. But just
I
going.
agree with that completely. I think in the next 10 or 20 years, they aren't going to have a choice anymore.
Yeah, I
So
think.
it's going to get worse before it gets better. But I agree with you completely. I'm also a pessimist. I think we're just going to have to ride the wave, man. We're just going to have to ride this out.
Yeah, I think after the wipeout,
Yeah.
having ridden that wave, I
I
think
wish we could play a clip of that song right now.
wipeout. After that wipeout, then America may start entertaining sane ideas
Sure.
in
Yeah.
geopolitics and domestic policy, but it
Yeah.
will not come until that happens. Quick surf music aside, the I was working under a CNA, a certified nursing assistant at a hospital the other day, and he was saying, "Yeah, I was a bodyguard for Elvis," and he's like,
Whoa.
"Oh." So I was playing frisbee with Dick Dale, and the frisbee went up in a guy's yard, and it was Ricky Nelson. No shit.
Far out. Yeah, that's awesome.
Wow. So for someone who's switching his career from education to healthcare, and he was 73, it's good. It was great to have an older mentor who had also done it. Who he lost his factory because it went to Mexico, thanks to all the trade policies we keep talking about.
Oh, well, there it is.
But Jennifer Lind and her article. I
Mhm.
mean, the shit that she mentioned as economic coercion that we should be so concerned about when China does it. That's garden
Sure.
variety. And you just mentioned some
Yeah.
shit that America does that is far worse. And we haven't gotten into the litany of assassinations and covert operations.
Sure.
So, what did Lynn say about China as a rising regional hegemon? She brought up other regional hegemons. Japan's 1930s and 40s Greater Asian prosperity sphere, or
Right.
America's endless mayhem in Latin America. Now, is it necessary that China is going to follow those two of the worst examples of regional hegemony of the last century?
Right.
I I don't think that they will.
It's.
But
I mean, it was the Japanese that have tried to conquer China repeatedly. It was never the other way around, from my understanding.
yeah, so she cites America and Japan's regional hegemony as the path that China will follow. That's horseshit, but it's the kind of horseshit that will get you promoted.
It'll get you paid in DC.
In what exactly? And that's exactly
Yep.
the point. Is that there's a group called Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, which was co-founded
Hmm.
by a longtime anti-war activist, Ray McGovern, and it will
Yeah.
get you promoted in DC. Exactly. Ray McGovern has this concept building upon the military industrial complex. He calls it the Mickey Map, the military industrial congressional intelligence media academia think tank complex.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I I think that is a great name.
It,
So
it really is, and he does great work along with. If anyone's curious about the money of Afghanistan, everyone should be paying attention to a professor at West Point that did multiple tours. That's in his 30s or 40s right now. Danny Sherson. I mean, the people act like Smedley Butler didn't happen in real life when there was
yeah,
already videotape and audio. Like this gets cookie cutter stamped out over and over again. So I appreciate you highlighting these examples.
what was that professor's name? Danny Schuster?
Yeah, Sherson.
Schuster.
So it's a Norwegian name. So if I remember correctly, Danny's last name is Shearson.
Yeah, he's great, and
He's great.
I think a lot of the most credible and impactful anti-war voices are veterans.
In the country right now.
And Ray McGovern used to do the presidential daily briefing, and
Agree.
Shearson is a veteran, and I think he teaches at West Point. I can't believe
It does. That
that
they
they
let
let that
him.
dude right in the belly of the beast.
Yeah,
That's incredible.
that's it. That is incredible. I mean, that's West Point and Georgetown. If you allow people to talk like that, I mean, he's just telling the truth. I think, you know, so many soldiers after the preposterousness of Afghanistan and Iraq feel that way. So if you don't allow one of them to speak it freely in one of their own institutions, they will consider it illegitimate in their own circle. So I think we're in a unique time where they have to let someone like Danny talk to his own future soldiers just to have any amount and modicum of integrity left for these young men and women to choose to do what they do. There's no doubt that there's people that enter that professional realm to get rich. I don't think anyone is ignorant of how knights and warriors get showered with land and treasure. To the victor go the spoils. And that's always been the case. But I think to have someone to tell the truth about what that looks like on a practical level, economically, and when you go home to sleep at night, I think that's very important.
Two other veterans that have become professors that you and I rely upon to inform our geopolitical thinking are Andrew Bacevich
Sure.
and Larry Wilkerson. But Andrew Bacevich taught at Tufts, and
Mm-hmm.
Wilkerson taught at College of William and Mary,
Yeah.
which are not in the total heart of the American war machine like West Point. So more power to Shearson for sure.
Well, and then the other thing about Bacevich specifically is he recently spoke with Chris Hedges for 30 or 60 minutes, and he told the truth. Bacevich flat out said, I don't think citizens in the United States care about geopolitics at all. He completely disagreed with Hedges on the geopolitical current stances of the United States being able to cause self-harm at some point. Bacevich flat out said, I don't think people care. And for that, I completely agree with him. And for the amount of money that gets spent in that area, and for the amount of people, the amount of strangers that get murdered in the name of the citizens of the United States, I appreciate Bacevich's practicality and courageousness and bravery for just calling a spade a spade. I think he's right. I don't think most people care. And to me, that's nuts.
But he cares.
He does,
And
which is why he told the truth.
And it's why he started the Quincy Institute, named after President Quincy, who said we should not go abroad in search of monsters to destroy.
Sure.
And this podcast and my article at stonefruit.substack.com
Go read it.
both be part of my application to the Quincy Institute to be their East Asian researchers. So here's a quick shout out to the hiring committee, Quincy and Quincy.
Basovich, hire Stonefruit immediately.
I am your
We need
man,
it.
Quincy
Yeah.
Institute.
Yeah.
But jumping back to how poorly the Biden administration has been dealing with China, let's turn now to Lloyd Austin,
Sure.
who is a perfect example of the revolving door between the military-industrial complex and government. So he resigned from the board of Raytheon to take the job as Secretary of Defense. He's former brass, and brass
Yeah.
have to wait a specific amount of time before they can re-enter government. He didn't wait that required length of time, but no one called him on it. So just before the Alaska summit in February of 2021, he established a China task force. On June 9th, 2021, he received their report, and the Defense Department media blurb was, quote, that Austin had, quote, issued an internal directive to laser focus Department of Defense efforts to address China as the nation's #1 pacing challenge. Now, I'm seeing that phrase pacing challenge a lot in national security circles, Mark.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, well, what does that mean? I assume it means that we should, like Spalding says, America's going to continue to spend $30 for forward force projection for every dollar that China spends on defense.
Right.
And in March of last year, the Quad was established, the Quadrennial Security Dialogue, to counter China's rising influence in Asia, which is composed of the United States, India, Japan, and Australia. This would seem like such a significant development in Asia-Pacific security, but Australia and Japan have already been stalwart allies since forever. India is always going to be playing
both sides.
How they were so important for the non-aligned movement in the 50s and 60s. They continue to steer an independent foreign policy that cooperates with other great powers when it suits them, and cooperating with other great powers when it suits them. So they will always have their own individual national interests.
There's no doubt about that. Absolutely.
I'm not that impressed with the Quad. That was this March of last year. But then
It's kind of a joke.
In June of last year, Xi Jinping said, we're not having it. He said, quote, we will not accept sanctimonious preaching from those who feel they have a right to lecture us.
Yeah.
I mean, that's hearkening back to why Mao was so popular with the New Left and the Global South and the colonized world, because even under Mao, China just was, fuck the West and their hypocrisy. And I think he's re-entering that rhetorical trend of China when he said that. And then another as big as the Quad was AUKUS, which was just the U.S. trying to muscle out of France, Australia.
Nobody talked about it. Literally, no one even talked about it.
It was just America trying to muscle in on a commercial trade. They just wanted to cut France out of selling Australia nuclear technology.
As submarines specifically, yes, that's right.
And so what? In 20 years under AUKUS, Australia will get 1990s era nuclear submarine technology?
Right. Whoop-de-doo. Yeah.
So
it's embarrassing.
So the Quad and AUKUS were sold in the press as these major developments of U.S.-led realignment in Asia-Pacific. I don't think so.
No.
And on December 8th of last year, it closed out with still more.
France immediately just inked an agreement with someone else to sell those submarines to somebody else.
It damaged.
They were just like, okay, this sucks. it's going to delay some money for like 18 months, but they immediately, because they thought the contracts were going to be in place, they immediately just sold. They immediately just put all those engineers to work elsewhere. They immediately just off the contracts.
And it damaged U.S.-France relations for a couple months,
That too,
but not
exactly.
not longer than that.
Yeah.
And so December of last year, Eli Ratner, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Security Affairs, testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. A word about Mr. Ratner, Mark.
Yeah.
This dude was the executive vice president and director of studies at the Center for New American Security,
What a shocking surprise.
which is the outfit set up by Uber hawk Michelle Flournoy,
Sure.
which is the outfit that created the war games that were just on Meet the Press. It's so incestuous.
It's incestuous and it's traceable, and
Yeah.
it's becoming shameless and embarrassing at this point. Like,
This,
they're not able to just get away with this. I don't know how average people are not just uh digging one level under and finding out, like, just follow the money. All you have to do is wiki the person. Where did they come from? Where did they go to school? Who did they work for? Like, all of this stuff is so easy to find. It's not, the circle is so tight and small right now. You just said the perfect word. It's incestuous. There's so few people deciding all of this stuff. It's very easy to find out who they are and why they're saying what they're saying.
but as I did the research for this article and this episode, it surprised even me.
Well, yeah.
And
Like,
I followed this shit closely, and I have a pretty decent intellectual background to be able to comprehend it. And here's what Ratner said before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, that the People's Liberation Army, quote, is likely preparing for a contingency to unify Taiwan with the PRC by force, while simultaneously attempting to deter, delay the intervention on Taiwan's behalf, meaning the United States. These
yeah,
operations are destabilizing, intentionally provocative, and increase the likelihood of miscalculation. Oh my God, are you fucking kidding me? And I looked at his background, University of California at Berkeley. I
yeah,
went there too. Okay, so
yeah,
there's this small number of universities that if you just have the dissertation with the right title, you go into government. Like, this guy seems like he's in his 30s. And then
sure,
when the Republicans come in, he'll go to a think tank. And then when the Democrats come back in, he'll go up to another slightly higher level. That's just how this works.
yeah,
And there was more war conditioning on the way to massage public opinion. Right before the Meet the Press war game, on May 10th of this year, Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines told the Senate Arms Committee, quote, "It is our view that the Chinese are working hard to effectively put themselves into a position in which their military is capable of taking Taiwan over our intervention." Lieutenant General Scott Berrier from the Defense Intelligence Agency also testified, and he said what I've been hearing a lot in the media too. He said, quote, he's worried about the lessons China may be taking from the war in Ukraine and the international response to it. It gets worse, Mark. that same day, the Chinese finally recognized a change on the online fact sheet about Taiwan at the State Department. The United States had removed a reference saying that they do not support Taiwan independence. They just took it out. And their spokesperson said, "Oh, well, we revise fact sheets periodically." Isn't that a pretty fucking important thing to leave in to maintain? I would think it would be.
Yeah.
So, in the midst of all of this, Biden is trying to peddle the Indo-Pacific economic framework.
Right.
So the way that the Quad and AUKUS are supposed to be realigning the security framework in Asia Pacific, this is going to realign the economic framework. But it's just some trade rules, but it doesn't offer incentives like access to the American market. It's just resting on the authority of a Biden executive order. It's not a treaty. So I
Right.
think Indo-Pacific economic framework is going to be about as weak for economic collaboration led by the United States as AUKUS and the Quad are. But I did notice this, and I think it's important for warmongering, is that in March of this year, 200 congressmen sent the Secretary of Commerce and the U.S. Trade Representative a letter saying, you got to include Taiwan in this Indo-Pacific economic cooperation, man. And over 50 senators sent a similar letter to Biden.
Yeah.
So if you have something as passive as trying to incorporate Taiwan into this international economic collaboration, which would be shitting all over the strategic ambiguity and one-child policy that America says is its formal policy.
Yeah.
You got that much support for something simple. How easy it would be for big tech and media and intelligence and the bloviating punditocracy to whip up war fever in Congress if it ever comes to a kinetic and cyber war.
That's
over
right.
Taiwan. So while the Biden administration is managing all of this war conditioning, and Flournoy and her think tank have this war extravaganza on Meet the Press, and fucking Chuck Todd is, ooh, so exciting.
He's already been banished to the web, I think. I don't even know if he's on the real channel.
I'm Chuck Todd, and I prefer the middle seat. But while they're doing all this war conditioning, Biden finally announces the Indo-Pacific Economic Cooperation, and he's got on board Australia, Brunei, India, Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, New Zealand, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam. But what's the loss to them to sign it? But what do they think they're gaining? Probably not very much.
Nothing. Yeah, they don't.
They just sign it. Sure. Okay.
Sure, whatever, man. Yeah.
Okay. And while he is selling this trade pact, a reporter asks him, quote, "Would you be willing to get involved militarily with Taiwan should China invade?" Yes. Right away.
Immediately.
Biden answers yes, definitively, curtly, and follows up like we said a little earlier in this episode. It was a commitment that we made. The next day, the Quad meets again in Tokyo. Russia and China send 2 bombers out each to fly over the Sea of Japan to say, hello, we're noticing.
Hey, yeah.
We do not approve. So all of Biden and the hawks on Republican and the Democratic sides efforts are just bringing China and Russia closer together. The Quad's not an alliance. AUKUS is not an alliance. It's not the germ of an Asian NATO. if anything would be, it would be the RIMPAC exercises that what used to be the Pacific Command, now renamed the Indo-Pacific Command,
That's right.
hosts every other year. And since that command is based in Honolulu at Pearl Harbor, I've been aware of it my entire life, and I think those participants could be an Asian NATO. And South Korea actually is going to join, or has just joined NATO's Cyber Command. And I have heard rumblings about NATO should get more involved in the South. So I don't think an Asian NATO is entirely out of the cards as America
I don't think people are aware. I think Venezuela or Colombia is a member of NATO. There's an oil producing country in South America that's in NATO.
Really?
Yes,
I don't think so.
I
We'll
do.
leave it to our viewers to search that one.
Yes.
Because Stonefruit and Mark have a little disagreement about that one. But, so these off the cuff remarks that Biden made about Russia and China, of course, his staff has to walk both of them back.
Mhm.
Say, no, there's no formal change in American policy. Yeah, well, those off the cuff remarks do illuminate two things. One is Biden's rapid onset dementia, and the other is elite thinking on core strategic goals. And I think this would and so we say, where is that elite thinking done? And this brings us back to Davos man again, who I would allege their entire function is to calibrate rhetoric and float policy proposals and even telegraph impending actions, which is why we're all worried about the Great Reset. You shall eat bugs and own nothing and like it. So their whole shtick is to preserve their advantages that they already have and to further the ongoing international class war within the Peace of Westphalia nation-state system.
That's right.
Established in the 17th century. The Davos man may participate as members and certainly influencers of the political class in their home countries. They use their home countries as tools and see their interests as above, behind, and beyond those of their own countries. And this is why I disagree with Mearsheimer when he says that states are the fundamental actors of great power politics, because they're not. This Davos global superclass is. And by pursuing their own interests so relentlessly, narrowly, and myopically, this class has definitively and permanently eliminated survival of the nation state as the principal goal and rationality as the means of achieving that goal, demolishing two other of John Mearsheimer's assumptions regarding great power politics. Goodman, in his book, had a great definition of Davos man, that they quote, occupy the stratosphere of the globe-trotting class, the billionaires, predominantly white and male, who wield unsurpassed influence over the political realm while promoting a notion that has captured decisive force across major economies, where the rules are organized around greater prosperity for those who already enjoy most of it. Everyone's a winner. So here's my big point, Mark, is that these rules are organized by that superclass in every field of economic endeavor on the planet.
That's right.
Which, in most cases, merely results in the ongoing collapse and social immiseration of the middle and working classes in so-called liberal democracies, a blighted future for the global South and the middle and inner working classes everywhere else,
Yeah.
and a precipitous collapse into universal ecological devastation and climate catastrophe.
Yeah.
That's standard operating procedure.
It is.
But when those rules are organized by the superclass in a specific field of economic endeavor, like modern high-tech war making by the Pax Americana, that's when I
Hmm.
get worried, Mark French.
Sure.
And America no longer has any of the checks or balances that used to apply even a modicum of breaking power on the war machine.
And that's the point you bring up that's so provocative and relevant repeatedly across decades. Hard power is nothing without soft power. If you just force this rapacious race to the bottom, capital flight system down other people's throats, the planet Earth is only so big. We're literally running out of stuff to steal. So the colonial imperialist model has really run its course. So the idea that you're going to inject it with a little bit of meth and B12 and steroids and re-inflate it somehow, I just don't see how that's going to work.
I found this phrase about 20 years ago, the bubble economy of the Earth's rape. And it has stuck with me because that
Yeah,
bubble has popped because there is nothing else left to rape. And that
yeah,
the person that said that was 20 years ago. It hasn't gotten any better. And
no, there's
why?
more bubbles. It's
Yeah,
bubble everything, like a
my,
fucking aquarium. It's bubble everything.
that that's my concern, and that's why I think Mearsheimer, the
Yeah,
Davos man is in control of all
yeah,
of the main countries of international neoliberal finance capital,
sure.
and their only objective is to continue the bubble economy of the Earth's rape, even though there is nothing else left to rape, and
Yeah,
they are going to use the American military as the means of enforcing the further inflation of the bubble economy of the Earth's rape.
right.
And even Putin noticed that the American Mickey Mac, as Ray McGovern put it,
Yeah,
is has detached itself from their control above and behind the American government, has detached the American government from what Mearsheimer said, rationality and survival. But Putin said, to a certain extent, Russian-American relations have become hostage to internal political processes in the United States itself. I hope it ends someday. Don't we all, Pooty Poot? I mean, the fundamental interests in the field of at least security, strategic stability, and the reduction of weapons dangerous for the whole world are still
well,
more important
yeah,
than.
I mean, even sociology, anthropology. I mean, this is leaking into every single field at this point. Yeah, I appreciate you highlighting uh, Mearsheimer's blind spots today so much, but because you could instantly also put in Francis Fukuyama.
Oh,
This
yeah.
is the end of history. Like you could Fukuyama, Greenspan. I mean, we've been listening to this for 50 years, and all these guys are turning out to be completely wrong, turning reality on its head, uh, bastardizing language and turning it upside down at Orwellian levels. I mean, it doesn't even really matter what silo or monopoly you decide to peek underneath its skirt. These things are being exposed over and over and over. These ideas, whether they really believe them in the first place, are turning out to be not very bright and disastrous, and only because it's connected to corrupt high finance is it even taken seriously anymore. I mean, these people should literally be spat upon in public.
Yeah, this is a Putin quote. He says here, quote, I mean, the fundamental interests in the field of at least security, strategic stability, and the reduction of weapons dangerous for the whole world are still more important than the domestic political situation in the United States itself.
Him and Lavrov, they have some real zingers about what gets espoused in the United States on a daily basis.
This is the guy that the American media is trying to portray as someone that his mother didn't show him enough affection as a child, and he's insane. It sounds
Right.
more like clear-eyed realism than anything I've gotten out of John Mearsheimer over the last few years.
Yeah.
So, middle class, big media, big tech, and the bloviating punditocracy, they won't shut up about how they're trying to protect the feeble citizenry from the disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation of malign actors. Well, this particular subset of Davos man, who's occupying the commanding heights of the American military-industrial complex, national security state, foreign policy blob, and the Mickey Mat, are the most malign actors on planet Earth.
Yeah. Right.
Obliterating 3 of Mearsheimer's 5 principles of great power politics. These lunatics don't even have planetary survival at heart. And here's my stirring crescendo, Mark. From their perspective, the war in Ukraine does not end with Russia withdrawing from Ukraine.
That's right.
And restoring Crimea to Ukraine, neither of which is ever going to happen.
No.
It doesn't even end with regime change in Russia, the installation of a new Western puppet like Yeltsin, and the pulverization of the Russian Federation a la NATO's war against Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
Which is never going to happen.
No.
It doesn't end until the inevitable rise of China has been thwarted, which is never going to happen.
No.
And the goal of American unipolar supremacy are reestablished, which is never going to happen.
No.
I think both parties, foreign policy, military affairs, they're still stuck in this golden era of American unipolar supremacy, the 90s. And those days are gone, and they are not going to return.
Long gone.
And a lot of the right now in politics in America are less than enthusiastic about the war in Ukraine, although they certainly voted for that $40 billion pact to Ukraine that the Biden administration only wanted $30 billion.
There was only like 6 people that didn't vote for it.
Yeah, and even my stalwart peacenik Barbara Lee, representative from Berkeley, voted for it. But the reason the right is less than enthusiastic about the Ukraine, to my mind, is that
Mm.
not because they're such devotees of peace, it's because they think Russia's a middleweight and containable. They don't want to take America's eyes off the prize and divert attention from America's quote unquote real enemy, China. So I've vaporized 3 of Mearsheimer's 5 principles, and I will now vaporize a 4th. It is his allegation that, quote, it is impossible to know the intentions of other states with any degree of certainty, end quote.
Sure.
Well, if you're not confused by all of the hypocritical ideology to be found in the Venn diagram of nation state institutions, and Davos-man interests, the intentions of other states can be ascertained with a reasonable degree of certainty by any intelligent non-specialist who has even a moderate understanding of the history, culture, people, and language of that state. And I laid out my bona fides for the Slav Chinese speaking cultures, and that's all anyone needs to do to understand the intentions of other states, is to have that kind of even a minimal background. So Putin understood America's intentions perfectly well when he said
That's
Russian
right.
relations have become hostage to the internal political processes in the United States.
That's right.
Xi Jinping had America's number when he said China will not accept sanctimonious preaching from people who feel they have the right to lecture us.
Yeah.
These 2 heads of state got America's intentions pretty accurately, so it's not hard. But
Well, I think I think the other side of that is I hope the rest of the world speaking in that manner with a historical basis shames normal people in the United States to have some kind of historical anchoring and curiosity about what else is happening. Because if you only pay attention to the raw math of it, the United States is only what, 5.5% of the entire population of the planet Earth? So when we have complete octogenarian, almost dead idiots like Trump and Biden speaking for all of us, that is what the rest of the world ends up thinking about us. And I don't think average people understand that. Everyone else is talking about this in a nuanced, contextual manner with some sort of historical basis. And that's where, you know, it's embarrassing on a global perspective. You know, I almost feel compelled to tell people I'm like Canadian when I'm in another country or something, even though they're very quickly garnering animus on our level. But to leave that aside, why is it left to other countries and other people to tell us about us? I think that is a blind spot and something that I consider irresponsible to allow our entire populace to be spoken about and looked upon in this way, because there is no real voice coming from the people. The reality is we are all going to be viewed in a way that is reflected in our actions and policies abroad. And I think that's being done in a way that most people would not agree with. And I think that's being done in a way that is not being decided by a majority of our population.
And it takes outsiders like us to point out what the graduates and professors of elite universities can't seem to comprehend.
Yeah.
And, my PhD is in education. It's not in foreign policy or international relations
Sure.
or security studies.
Of course.
And it is, alas, from the University of Hawaii and not Johns Hopkins or Georgetown or Harvard or any of the other elite institutions that churn out members of the foreign policy blob, military industrial complex, national security state.
Sure.
But even with my humble knowledge and credentials, I will presume to assign the tensions of China and America in East Asia with a reasonable degree of certainty, Mark French.
Yeah.
Let me break it down for these illustriously resumed minds that don't seem to understand it, and here it is. China knows it will thrive in the already existing framework of international law and
That's
national
right.
sovereignty.
Yeah.
That's why it's not having any truck with the quote unquote rules based order. Because no, let's just stick to what we've already signed and agreed to.
Yeah. I'm
And
still going to be able to hear you. Keep talking. I have to step aside for my dog. Keep talking.
Yeah, here's a long one. I'll just ramble it. China's primary motivation on the international scene is the transaction of peaceful, orderly international trade and investment to satisfy its bottomless appetite for commodities and its rapidly growing new need for markets, as well as offloading manufacturing lower down the value chain to Southeast Asia and Africa. Sees Russia as an integral partner in BRICS, the Belt and Road Initiative, and establishing a new reference currency that will displace the dollar. Its regional aspirations for a limited sphere of influence include reintegrating Taiwan, winning uncontested sovereignty over what Japan calls the Senkaku and they call the Diaoyu Island, and the South China Sea islets it has militarized, and achieving unrivaled primacy in the South China and East China Seas, what they call the first island chain, and then achieving unrivaled primacy in the second island chain, which goes from some islands offshore of Tokyo down through the Marianas and Saipan and Guam into Micronesia. But what America and the West completely fail to see in their hubris and short-term thinking and exclusive focus on kinetic war, plus cyber, is that China is deeply pragmatic and realistic, two words that are similar but not entirely the same. It is a country that sees war and security through a wide variety of lenses. Kinetic and cyber war not even being the most important among them. To China, the central weapon of war is time itself.
Yeah, that's right.
They know they have power since the 15th century naval expedition of Zheng He. I mean, this dude, while Portugal and Spain are making ships that are 40 or 50 feet long and hugging the coast, these guys are making 400-foot long vessels, and Zheng He led a frickin' armada to check out the Indian Ocean and South Asia, and
Yeah.
he he came back with his goodies and his knowledge, and China basically said, "Meh, yeah, there's nothing out there more that tops what we got, so never mind."
Yeah.
So I think that that started the imperial decline, was those naval expeditions in the 15th century.
Sure.
So that compounded a characteristic of Chinese civilization, which is the extremely intense Han chauvinism and ethnocentrism.
Right.
But because that is a multi-century slide, they are not impatient to require to not endure. They realize that their reestablishment as Zhongguo, Middle Kingdom, center of the world, it will take a while.
Right.
So they're patient. It took a while to lose their status. It may take a little while to get it back. So when the narrative of international Marxism lost all of its credibility in China, they had to establish a new national narrative. And the one that really stuck was the century of humiliation, starting from the Opium Wars. And yeah, no wonder it stuck, because it was horrible. The
Yeah.
colonial powers just feasted on
Decimated. Yeah.
feasted on the corpse of a empire, of a dynasty in horrible decline.
Hmm.
And it bears mentioning that America's participation in the Opium War established some of America's earliest and greatest family fortunes,
Yeah.
like the Astor, the Delano, the Roosevelt, Forbes, and Russell. Well,
Hmm.
Roosevelt, there's been two Roosevelt presidents. Forbes, John Kerry is a Forbes, Mark.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Steve Forbes ran for president. So a lot of America's wealth and political class grew out of the Opium War in China.
That's right. Yep.
And so this new narrative of redeeming the insults of the century of humiliation and reassuming their place as the world's superpower is incredibly energizing. So they're
Yeah.
and they're in no way ever lost on the Chinese people that China is the only current nation state that is also undeniably a civilization. And not only that, but the world's oldest continuous one.
That's right.
Uh, when Trump met with Xi, he was, China's very old civilization, isn't it? Isn't it Xi? And Xi goes, yeah, Egypt's pretty old too.
I mean, it's funny, but that's, you know, Trump and Biden are really how the rest of the world thinks all of us. They think that's the way we speak. Like that, at the end of the day, what is so embarrassing about these geopolitical situations where you have one 80-year-old moron shitting their pants and about to croak at any second, speaking for all of us, it's really how the rest of the world thinks all of us talk. Like these people are speaking for all of us. And I do not understand how this is acceptable to anyone. It's embarrassing.
Oh my God, Kamala Harris was on some call.
Oh God.
That one, you remember? You probably know where I'm going. That one where she said, Russia is a big country. Ukraine is a much smaller country. They are next to each other. The big country invaded the smaller country. Oh my God.
It's so embarrassing. I do not understand how that woman is allowed to even, I mean, why? What? I mean, and this is potentially going to be our next president. It's preposterous. When
And she,
Trump, if Trump stays alive, when he wins in a landslide, how embarrassing is that going to be?
yeah, that was truly pathetic. but so the Chinese, I mean, I thought Xi Jinping's comment, "Oh, Egypt's pretty old too." That was a nice shout out, but and
Yeah,
you can shout out to Mesopotamia too, but
sure.
even to recognize those as old and also very important, they didn't give so much of the technology and material culture, cultural innovations that are central to being a human on this planet that China did. I mean, it's just true. And that is the source of China's intense ethnocentrism and chauvinism.
Hmm.
And as a scholar who, has existed in higher education for a time and keeps tabs on it, Mark, first of all, about half of them or more are in STEM: science, technology, engineering, and math.
That's right.
And if they are in the social sciences and humanities, they have an exclusive focus on only three subjects. That is China, and also China.
Why would they need to pay attention to anything else?
I defy anyone to point out any substantial scholars of prominence that in the social sciences and humanities that don't focus on China.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's some, but boy, if we could just do some sort of survey of their dissertations or the fields they're teaching in, if it's not 80% or more that their subject is China, I'd be surprised. But
Sure.
so that's how we can understand China's attention policy elites. It's not that difficult.
Right.
So that's why Mearsheimer is full of shit when he says it's impossible to know with any certainty.
Yeah.
I just declared America's Mickey Mats intention, but it bears repeating. To halt the inevitable rise of China and reestablish American unipolar supremacy to the golden years of 1990 to 2019, roughly, but especially the late 90s.
Yeah.
Newsflash, policy elites, it is never going to happen.
No.
So it won't stop until the empire collapses into bankruptcy. And
That's right.
like you said, that is the moment that will happen. And that is the moment that we could start establishing sane foreign policy and domestic policy. Or it won't stop until we all die in a nuclear holocaust.
Yeah. Right.
That's where the American military industrial complex, or Ray McGovern's Mickey Mac, is taking us.
Yeah.
Regime dismemberment, stopping China's rise, or the empire going bankrupt, or nuclear holocaust. Those are the only strategic goals. And then,
Yeah. 99.9% bad for the entire planet, except those 2,800 people deciding this shit.
so if we're lucky enough that America doesn't start a kinetic war killing us all,
Right. Yeah.
and it merely goes bankrupt, then we still have to work with the remnants of human civilization and whatever survives out of the smoldering wreckage of the nation state system,
That's
they
right.
will still have to deal with universal ecological collapse and the climate catastrophe,
Right.
which will be absolutely at full speed by then in just the next couple decades.
Sure.
And here's my stirring conclusion is that China surpassing the United States in GDP, which think tanks think is probably going to be around 2027,
Right.
the planet passing tipping points carrying the climate to temperature increases of at least 4% centigrade over pre-industrial levels. And that moment when all federal discretionary spending is eaten up by military spending are all set to happen at about the same time
Yeah.
at the end of this decade.
Right.
And if we struggle through that, then we still have ecological collapse, the collapse of post-industrial civilization, and the climate catastrophe to
Yeah.
come.
Right. Exciting time to be alive.
Yes.
Come on, millennials.
Yeah.
when 2040 comes and all of this really hits the fan, those kids are going to be a little bit younger than me, right? That I am right now. And it's like, come on, guys. Like, I'm really crossing my fingers for the TikTokers to quit their Starbucks job and start tinkering around in the garage and like participate and help because I'm pessimistic. I don't know how this is going to turn out. It's the the rich plutocrats, octogenarians have purposely written laws that skipped a couple of worthwhile generations and left them out of the economy and policy in a meaningful way. And I don't know what that's going to end up looking like at this point. I'm pessimistic. The only thing that gives me hope is Winston Churchill said, "The Americans will always end up doing the right thing when they have exhausted every other option." So I think we're at the apex of exhausting the financialized Goldman Sachs, Vanguard, Blackstone, BlackRock options. I think I think we're beating a dead horse, and as those ideas expose themselves as kind of fallacious in the first place and really damaging 50 years later, I think people might get off the bench at that point and be like, "Hey, guys, why don't we pay attention and start doing something cool?"
I think you put a real bow on it, Mark French. And I don't know why, but I think that the world is in such a conundrum at this stage of trying to re-inflate the bubble economy of the Earth's rape when there is nothing else left to rape,
Yeah, we don't have another Earth.
that the only thing going through my mind is a non sequitur from Christopher Walken on Saturday Night Live.
More cowbell?
Mark, I've got a fever, and the only prescription is more
Yeah,
cowbell.
yeah.
So, war makers in the Mickey Mac, you've got a prescription, and the only you've got a fever, and the only prescription
Yeah.
His war with Taiwan.
Yeah, that's right. Oh man, you got it. You're doing good work.
On that stirring and comic note, I think we will bring to a close our longest episode yet of The Hardline, according to Stonefruit, with my ace, Mark French. Peace out, Internet people.